In order to store data in our programs, we need to use variables and constants. You can think of a variable as a storage space that can only store one item at a given time. Now, how do we create variables? In order to create a variable, you need to follow two steps. The first step is declaration, and the second step is initialization. In declaration, we declare the data type and we give our variable a name. Data type is nothing but the type of data that you want to store. It can be number, it can be text, it can be characters, and so on and so forth. Java has some built-in data types for you to use. These include byte, short, int, long, float, double, character or char, and boolean. These are used to store different kinds of data. To understand this better, let's try creating a variable to store user's age. And as we know, age is a number, therefore we can choose any of the number data types. One of these is int, for example. You'll notice that the color of the text changed. That's because it is considered a keyword, and all your data types are considered keywords. So the first step in creating a variable is to figure out the data type. And for our example, we are using int because we want to store age, which is a number. Now, the second step is you need to name the variable. In our case, in our example, we can name the variable age, but a better name or a more descriptive name would be user age. User age, it is more descriptive of whose age are we storing, basically. You can even name it age, no problem, but we usually recommend creating descriptive names for your variables. Now, this part is considered declaration. So this is the data type and this is the name of the variable. You can end it here with just a semicolon and it will be fine. It does give you a warning here that you've created a variable but you've never read from it or you've never written to it, because at this point your variable is an empty box. You can think of it like an empty box. It knows that it needs to store a number and it knows that its name is user age, but it doesn't have any value right now. So to give it a value, we use the second step, which is the initialization of the variable. I can say go to user age variable and store the age or store the number 18. So we're saying go to the user age variable, which we just declared, and store the value 18 in it. So this part, you can think of it as declaration. And this is initialization. You can even declare and initialize a variable on the same line, and that would be by removing the semicolon and putting it all together in one line. So you have a variable called user age, which has the data type integer, and the value that it has is 18. Now I can even print it out. I can say user's age is, and then if I just write user age here and I run this, you can see that it's actually printing the word user age for me. It's not printing the value that it has stored. In order to use variables in print statements, what we do is we write it outside the double quotes if you want to print it. So here you would write user age, and if you run it now, you can see it prints user age is, and then instead of the word user age, it's now printing the value of the variable user age. Now, when you create variable names, you must have noticed I've written user age together without any space. If you try to add a space, it's going to give you an error because you cannot have spaces in variable names. That's one rule. You cannot have a variable start with a number. So for example, if I put a number just before this, let's say 5, again, that's wrong. Your variable names should start with letters from the alphabet. And then you cannot have the variable name be a keyword. What does that mean? If I write int and then if I write void, for example, void is a keyword because it's orange in color. So all the words that are orange in color in this case are considered keywords. You cannot use keywords as variable names because these words have specific meaning for the system. So the system gets confused. Is it a name or are you trying to use the meaning of this keyword? So those are some of the rules that are there. And if you have multiple words in the variable name, so for example, I have 2 words here, user, and then I have age. You always write it in camel case, like this, camel case. So the first letter of the first word is always small, and the first letter of every following word should be capital. Now, there are many other data types that we can look at. For instance, I can say if I wanted to store a decimal number, so for example, 18.5, I cannot do that with int because int only allows you integers, which is negative numbers, 0 or positive numbers. But if you want to store the decimal numbers, you need to use either float or double. And they're different in the way that we use them. For example, if I use float, or let's start with double. If I use double and I say user weight is 60.5, this is fine because double allows the decimal point, but integer doesn't allow decimal points. But if you write float, and let's say user height, and let's make it 167.8, you can see it's giving me an error here, which means that there's a conversion problem from double to float, because whenever you use float, after you've written the number, you need to put the letter F. That's the only difference. So for float, you just need to put F at the end of the number. If you use double, you don't have to do that. You can just directly write the number. One more thing about variables, it is all your variable names should be unique. So for example, if I try to create a Boolean user age again, and Boolean variables Boolean data type basically has true or false. It can store true or false because it's used to store the state. So if I look at the error now, it says user age is already defined. So if I change this to user graduate, now it's fine. It doesn't give me an error. And for Boolean, you can either use true or false. No other value can be used for Boolean. Now, there are different data types. For example, if you want to store numbers, you can have int, you can have, let's start with the smallest one. You have byte, short, int, and then long. They all allow you to store integer numbers, which means negative numbers, positive numbers, and 0. Without any decimal points, but the only difference between each of them is the size that you can store. So for example, for byte, if I try to create a variable with the data type byte and call it number is equal to 27, it's fine. But if I try to give it a number greater than 127, which is, let's make it 128, it's going to give me an error, because byte can only store numbers between -128 to 127. If you assign numbers outside of that range, it will give you errors. So that's the only difference between these kind of data types. Even between double and float, it's just the matter of how long numbers can be stored in these data types. Now, the last thing is constants. So for example, I've created a variable here, user age. I can print it here. Age is user age. And if I run it, you can see it prints age 18. I can change that value somewhere in my program to another number. So let's say I make age 20, and then when I print it again, age is now user age. You can see first it was 18, then it updated the value to 20, and the next time you use the user age variable, the value that it has is now 20. This is why we call it variable. Variable just means that you can change the value. But it is important to know that at one point, at a given time, a variable can only store one value. Now, if I don't want it to change, I always want it to remain the same value. If, for example, I don't want the user's age to be changed, all I have to do is I add the final word before the variable, before the declaration and the initialization. And then you notice this statement now gives an error because it's telling you that you're trying to change the value of a final variable, which is a constant. So you cannot change values of constants. So this line will give you an error. And the convention of creating the name of a constant is that you have to always have capital letters. And then if you have multiple words, you separate them using the underscore key. This would be a correct this would be the correct way of creating a constant. So if I replace this here with user age, and then user age, and then run this, it's the same thing. So that is all about data types, variable, and constant. It's quite easy if you get the idea. Data types are the kind of data that you're trying to store. Variables allow you to store one value at a time, and you can change that value. And constants also allow you to store values, one value at a time. But the problem with constant is that you cannot change it once you assign the value. And the way to create a constant is just to add the final word in the beginning. So I think that's it. If you have any questions, if you have anything that you want me to clear, you can leave that in the comments below, and then I'll try to get back to it. And I think that's it. Have a great day. See you next time.